everyone, to our Jupiter and Scorpio part 2, which is transiting Jupiter through all of the 12 houses. As you can see on your screen, Jupiter is going to go into Scorpio on October 10th, 2017. It will be there until November 8th of 2018. Before we get into tonight's materials, first of all, our housekeeping slide. Here at EAN, you can study with us 3 different ways. Leroy and I, as Media Monk and Star Lady, publish a free weekly audio podcast. We have an astro library where we have put together the archives of all the materials we have produced over the last probably almost 15 years now. And of course, we have our Evolutionary Astrology course in which you can study the world of EA with us. Here I am going to just go in pretty succinctly and quickly. For those of you who have not yet looked at Jupiter Part 1, which was the archetypes, I have bullet pointed all the archetypes that we went into a couple of nights ago in a lot more detail. So I'm just going to quickly read through these, and you can keep these concepts in mind as we get to Jupiter through all the 12 houses. And so the archetype of Scorpio in the 8th house, along with its ruler Pluto, represents the soul in evolutionary astrology. And that soul is represented both individually and collectively, and all souls are known by its dual desire nature. One, a desire to separate from that which created us, or the desire to incarnate into a physical body, lifetime after lifetime after lifetime. Or 2, the desire to return to that which created it, or the desire to know universal source or God, Goddess, Great Spirit, whatever your terminology is. We have a gazillion separating desires that we exhaust through countless lifetimes until the desire to return to source becomes more and more conscious and eventually the only desire left. So this archetype of Scorpio is where we become aware of the larger forces in the universe, the larger forces of power that exist outside of ourselves. And again, this also includes both separating and returning forces, what our religious terms would say are evil and good. More details, again, Jupiter and Scorpio part 1. So Jupiter and Scorpio is where we're facing our greatest emotional fears and reaching for deeper levels of self-reliance, that Taurus polarity to Scorpio. And we do this through realignment with a greater source of power, which again may be of a separating or returning nature. So these separating versus returning desires and forces battle it out in the archetype of Scorpio, in the archetype of the 8th house, and in each of us on an individual soul level via our Pluto by sign house aspect. So this gets emphasized when Jupiter transits through Scorpio. And so that Jupiter expansion principle, when it moves through Scorpio, has got to recognize what it can create and what it cannot create, what it can manifest and what it cannot manifest. So this is where we learn those boundaries of power and powerless. And the separating forces in nature are always going to attempt to keep us separated from source and separated from others, while having us keep repeating or clinging to those old separating desires. And if I may, because many of us are so aware of what's happened in Las Vegas a few days ago, this is a prime example of the separating forces keeping us in our fears, keeping us separated from each other. And that battle between how many guns do I need in order to protect me from you versus being those who find the courage to help, to love, to be a first responder, to do whatever they can to keep us connected through any and all battles. Interestingly enough, 12 years ago, just before Jupiter went into Scorpio the last time, in late August, we had August of 2005, Katrina, the Hurricane Katrina. And while that wasn't a massacre, it was a situation where, if I may, and again, I will because I can and I may, it was a situation where the whole haves and the have-nots between the lower Ninth Ward of New Orleans, which was inundated with water, which was a lot of your poor Black American people that, sat on their rooftops asking for help, that was just slow to come. Same thing is being repeated right now with Puerto Rico and Hurricane Maria. And it just brings to the forefront those who say, oh, you're on your own, oh, you'll figure it out, versus all of us going, wait a minute, how do I help the least of us, the poor of us, the ones who are in the most need of help? That's that difference between giving, sharing, and including, and taking, hoarding, and excluding, which are also key concepts in this whole situation between separating and returning in the universe. Jupiter in Scorpio also brings up all of those famous trust issues. And if we don't have self-trust, which comes through Taurian polarity, self-reliance, self-acceptance, self-love, self-empowerment, then how do we trust what's outside of us if we can't trust what's inside of us? And of course, Jupiter in Scorpio will bring up all of our relating patterns that need to change, as well as any and all relationship commitments, endings, and new beginnings. Jupiter in Scorpio is going to bring about all of the emotional frustrations as our security buttons get pushed. Again, if you don't have the Taurus polarity of self-reliance, then you don't trust your universe, and you get very frustrated because you're not in control, you're not in power. It feels like you're powerless to the universe. So that polarity is always teaching us to deepen our inner self-reliance in order to find that courage, Scorpio word as well as Aries, to find that courage to move forward in new ways. And as we are moving through all this and really deepening in our sense of self and self-reliance, self-trust, self-love, evolving towards those returning desires, eventually we get to the possibility of soulmates. And that can be one of the deep themes of Jupiter and Scorpio, clearing out some of those karma mates so that we can really align ourselves with a deeply spiritual committed relationship and a soulmate. And from the perspective of EA, the definition of soulmates are two people whose driving intent is their own spiritualization process. And they come together for the purpose of supporting and helping each other on that spiritualization process, even if the best solution is the why in the road. In other words, the shift from conditional to unconditional love. Of course, Jupiter in Scorpio will bring up all kinds of sexuality issues and lessons. It will bring the distortions due to patriarchal conditioning principles that have been on the planet for so long. It'll bring all of those sexual distortions out onto front and center stage. For instance, Hugh Hefner, who started the Playboy magazine after World War II in the late 50s in response to Leave It to Beaver and all of the, mom and pop and everything is just a wonderful, cushy world that we had in the 50s post World War II. There was a lot of it that was pretty good, some of our most prosperous times. And yet there was still some suppression of sexuality via a lot of religious social conditionings. And when something is suppressed, it is going to come out one way or another. You can suppress truth, but you can't destroy it. And sexuality is one of the most natural laws on planet Earth. As a matter of fact, as we discussed in part 1, the last separating desire to be released is the sexual desire. On a natural basis, only 1 to 2% of souls on planet Earth have naturally exhausted the sexuality desire. Yes, the procreation of the species, but also the last desire that's going to go because of that incarnation into the human form. And of course, as we're working with that dual desire nature, death can be the ultimate lesson of leaving the separating desires behind, reaching the next level of self-reliance, and merging with Source. And of course, in one line here, resources, which includes money, which includes all the material stuff and everything that you can combine, including merging your resources with another, which we have a tendency to do in any marriage type committed relationship. This is also a major Scorpio archetype. We'll go into some more details of this as we go around the 12 houses. So Jupiter in Scorpio brings the potential to identify the essence of whatever issues of area of life we need to focus upon, to penetrate, to discover, and to solve whatever mysteries of life exist for the betterment of ourself and for others in general. Now, one thing to keep in mind as we go through Jupiter transiting through the 12 houses, if you are having your Jupiter return and you have Jupiter in Scorpio, it's going to fall into one of those 12 houses. And as we go through this transiting of the 12 houses, any of the archetypes we speak about is going to relate to anyone who has natal Jupiter in one of those 12 houses. All right, so before we move into the first house, I'm going to quickly get my little clock, which gives me my timer, because I want to be fair and equal. Jupiter almost finished up with Libra. I'm going to be fair and equal to all 12 houses as best as I can watch the clock, so I'll be right back.
Just as a quick reminder to everybody on the call tonight, we are accepting fall enrollments to our Evolutionary Astrology course. We have just completed the first in a series of webinars, monthly live webinars for associates and students of the course with the Sun Square the Nodes class. That's in your registered associates area if you are a participant and an associate on this call. If you're not, feel free to purchase your course materials and get immediate access to all those archives and webinars as we have completed them. So how are you doing, Kim? Did you find your
Yeah, I just thought it might be better to just literally have a clock in front of me and looking at our time so that I can, again, coming off of Jupiter and Libra, give equal measure to each of the 12 houses as best as I can. Keep in mind also, as we looked at those beginning slides, Scorpio is that principle of death, both literal and figurative. And so many of us, whenever any planet moves through that sign of Scorpio, we don't know whether the symbol is going to be figurative or whether it is going to be literal. Jupiter in Scorpio, because it's the principle of expansion, will many times bring the release of something materialistic in order to expand into. So that can cover resources, that can cover relationships, that can cover whatever we are clinging to on a codependent level. And of course, it can include the archetype of death and dying. So no matter which one of the 12 houses Jupiter transits, we could see that happen. And as I was pondering that, it just popped in. It was like, oh, Jupiter in Scorpio third could be death of a friend. Jupiter Scorpio fourth, death of a family member. Jupiter and Scorpio transiting through the fifth house, death of a childhood classmate. Jupiter transiting through Scorpio in the sixth house could be death of a coworker. So we don't quite know how it will work, and we don't know whether it will be literal or figurative. But one of the major things to remember when it is literally death, it is just a door. It is just a transition from a physical incarnation back into the non-physical form. Because again, as Pluto, ruler of Scorpio and the eighth house, represents the soul. The soul is that mutable, immutable consciousness that exists from lifetime to lifetime. So anything that comes forth into a living, breathing embodiment, be it two-legged or four-legged, or, be it having petals and leaves and flowers, it's never not existing. It just changes the form of how it exists. And this is something to remember from a perspective of hope, because chances are Jupiter and Scorpio, there can be some intensities that are going on. This transit is falling into the base note of the Uranus waxing squares to Pluto. This transit is falling into the base note of consensus political leaders who think they can create peace by building bigger and bigger and bigger bombs. I make the joke, people will ask me, do you think, somebody's going to go crazy and annihilate planet Earth? And I make the lighthearted joke, well, we'll all just reincarnate in another galaxy, in another solar system, on another planet Earth. We won't cease to exist. We'll find another place to pick up where we left off. So hopefully in some way that brings a little bit of comfort as we deal with this issue of death and dying through Jupiter and Scorpio when it comes along on that literal basis. So when we look at Jupiter moving through the first house, and as I have a tendency to do when I talk about any archetype, I talk about the distortion of the archetype and I talk about the natural expression of it, because both can exist. And in evolutionary astrology, you must observe and correlate. You can't look at that little glyph on a circle chart on a piece of paper and know how it's going to manifest itself. You must have the interaction with the being to observe and correlate and see where exactly it is they are choosing to energize. And again, the dual desire nature, separating forces, returning forces. The distortions through the 12 houses will be similar to the separating forces having their influence. The natural expression of Jupiter and Scorpio through the 12 houses will be the returning force, making itself known. And it will be up to each of us to choose how we want to play with this energy. So when Jupiter in Scorpio transits through the first house, we can force our will upon others in order to meet our own desires, me over you. We can have all of the dominating situations, although we can be dominated if we feel weak enough through other things in our chart. We can have definitely manipulation of relationships and situations because that first house energy and that intuitiveness of Jupiter is going to go to what's in it for me. We can have all the sexual games and distortions. The instinctive sexual energy comes through Aries first house Mars. We can, in its extremes, have selfishness. If there's nothing in it for me, I can't even bother to notice you exist. We can have anger build up to the point that it just comes raging out. And this is when Aries in first house doesn't have all the freedom that it wants to have to do whatever it wants in any situation. As I said before, we can be dismissive of others, especially after our own needs are met. There's none of that Libra polarity or seventh house polarity of the giving and receiving. It's all what's in it for me. So when Jupiter in Scorpio is distorted through the first house, we can have a whole lot of psychological manipulation. It can be instinctive, and sometimes they just don't even recognize they're doing it. And in some souls, they can be quite aware that they're doing it. And sooner or later, the pendulum swing of the universe is going to give them a psychic or a physical 2x4, as we have a tendency to say. If we want to look at Jupiter and Scorpio transiting through the first house and evolving in a natural expression, this is where we're going to utilize our psychological instinct and intuition for the betterment of all concerned. That's the polarity of the seventh house. We know what to do for ourselves, but we're going to have that morality or conscience that says, and how is this going to affect somebody else? And what am I going to do that makes it turn out best win-win for everyone? And because Jupiter and Scorpio can just in general be so psychologically astute, this transit, they're going to instinctively, they don't have a thought out plan, but when they're orientated towards being good and helpful and returning and, merging with others, they're just going to instinctively know how to help someone else, to know what's best to do in any situation. And they just do it. They're going to know when to initiate new endeavors. Their intuition is just going to say, it might be good to do it, when Mercury goes direct. They're going to have an ability to be very deeply self-honest. Jupiter is truth versus lies. And Scorpio is turning that deep psychological eagle eye on something. And when it's the first house, it's ourself. And so they're not going to play games with themselves. They're going to own up to what needs to self-improve. And they're going to honor a need to be alone for spiritual questing. Jupiter is always the expansion of our beliefs and our cosmology. And Scorpio is going to be doing it on a deep psychological level. And when it transits through the first house, it's not about having a party. They're going to have a certain percentage of alone time and the ability to honor that, to really have their deep intuitive connection to source arise from within, to be known, to honor it. This transit is going to have an ability to call out any BS, to use the polite word, bull, blah, blah. They're just going to, they're going to have a real good BS meter, and they can call, in addition to calling themselves out when they're playing games or not being honest and truthful, they're going to be able to do that with everybody else. And it might be uncomfortable for others they're in relationship with. This transit is going to have the courage to be leaders, and they're going to have the courage to lead whether others follow or not. They're going to honor that instinct. This is what's best for me to do for myself and others. And they're going to have that Scorpio courage and just go do it. They're going to be honoring of freedom in others as well as themselves. Again, when Scorpio can't trust, it has to control that environment. It has to manipulate that environment. And when that is happening, there's no freedom. So when there is the self-trust and the self-reliance, then they can be a group of one. They can honor themselves, and they will honor that in others as much as within themselves. Now, to really go into all the details through the 12 houses, we would have a 2-week class. So I'm going to try and get it down into 2 hours. And I got a lot of Scorpio in my chart. So I'm quite psychologically orientated, and I have a lot of Sag in my chart. So I'm very spiritually orientated. So I'm going to be honing in on the psychology, spirituality as we go through these 12 houses. And hopefully wherever your interest lies, you can extrapolate that into the manifestation of how things can actually come through and work in some more detailed, just more details if you're interested in that. When transiting Jupiter in Scorpio is moving through the 2nd house, the distortions become very, very controlling and possessive of resources. And that will include relationships as well. And that can include controlling the money in the relationship. One spouse having to have the pocketbook, and all the money is turned over to them, even if they're both working. This transit, we can have overspending, living beyond their means, keeping up with the Joneses, thinking that they're always going to have more resources, or they can do the exact opposite. They can sit on their resources and not share them. They can hoard. They can, be the miser, and they can live in the fear of never having enough. So there's actually TV programs about hoarding, where they can't throw away the newspaper. They can't throw away their containers from fast food. And I actually have known someone like that. It was a friend of my sister's family, and walked into their house and couldn't. I was like, oh my God. They actually had a fire in the house, believe it or not. Kind of took care of the hoarding. This transit, when it's distorted, it can use sexuality in all its many ways, and they will use it to manipulate others. They will use it to control others. Of course, this is a classic symbol of prostitution, which is using sex for money. They can lose their resources with this transit, and many times that means there will have been either prior abuse of resources, and the pendulum swing has them losing it all to learn. Or it can even be that they put too much dependency of security into their stuff, and they need to see themselves as a resource or the ultimate resource source. So they can sometimes lose it because it's an evolutionary necessity to learn. Of course, Jupiter and Scorpio through the second can worship the material gods. They can worship all the stuff of the consensus world, the yachts and the luxury houses, or you name it. We see some of that extremism in some ways with our current president, who has Jupiter in the second house. It's in Libra, it's not in Scorpio. But you can see that worshiping of the material gods there. There can be codependency underneath isolation. So sometimes Jupiter and Scorpio through the second house, there can be so much lack of trust and lack of self-reliance that they fear relationship. They fear intimacy. So they isolate themselves. I don't need anybody. I don't even try. And underneath that, due to the eighth house polarity, can be some extremes of codependency. If I really open up and relate to someone, I'm going to lose my sense of self. I'm going to lose my sense of power. So they won't even try. With this transit, there can also be a refusal to look at one's own intent with anything. Again, that intuition of Jupiter and psychology of Scorpio, there can be so much tendency towards manipulation and control. And here, that second house stubbornness can set in, and oh, that's not me. They're doing that. Eighth house polarity. That's that other person who is playing games and manipulating me. When we start to look at the natural expressions in the evolution and growth of transiting Jupiter and Scorpio through the second, of course, one of the most basic things is going to be recognizing the sacredness of sexuality. And this is going to be both from self-sex, and this will be someone who is becoming more and more self-resourceful on a sexual basis. And when they satisfy their own needs, then there is an openness towards helping and giving to another as to what they really need. And of course, again, here with Jupiter, there is a desire to really make sexuality meaningful, make it sacred, to make it the means to know that connection with divinity or source through connecting with another. And this is going to then lead to that ability to honor the divine in another person, to see the divinity in them and honor that in them on a flesh and blood level. This transit will also then learn how to be sharing of its resources. It won't be hoarding them. It won't be selfish in just spending it only on themselves. They'll learn when to share, when not to share. Scorpio following Libra. They will also be empowering of others in their ability to create resources. They will recognize second house, the polarity eighth, which is Scorpio, that when we merge our efforts together, we can create more. When we merge our resources together, we can create more. When they recognize the ultimate resource is source energy, they can recognize then that an ability to create resources can be endless, it can be boundless. We can give it all away and create it better yet. There will also be, which is part of the second house Taurus concept, there can be a simplification in regards to their resources. They can look at some of the stuff that maybe they've naturally been able to accumulate, and they can go, I don't need to have a dozen coats when there are those that have nothing to keep them warm. So they can shed resources and want to just really move towards what is essential to fulfill my needs. In other words, I'm not going to be so fulfilled from outside of myself, but I am more and more to the inside. In other words, there gets to be a deep psychological awareness of what is needed to not only survive, but to flourish. And that doesn't mean you've got to have a whole bunch of this and that. You can have it, but it cannot be the substitute for a relationship with the divine. And so they are moving towards the recognition that they really want to have deep relationships, deep committed relationships with someone else over all of the superficial fluff that's out there. They want to have a deep divine relationship with another person rather than having to flaunt keeping up with the Joneses and, you know, my yacht's bigger than your yacht or whatever it is, and however you want to look at it. So there really is a evolution of resources and how we create them and what we need, and recognizing they cannot substitute for that relationship with the divine and a deep relationship with someone else. When Jupiter in Scorpio transits through the third house, the distortions can be psychologically manipulating conversations. Jupiter in Scorpio turns its eagle eye onto words and communications and conversations, and they can be very aware of how they speak and what they say to create the intent of wherever they're wanting something or someone to go. So they can always be leading situations in communications to any desired end result. And sometimes it can be an end result that works to their betterment at the expense of someone else. And because they can be psychologically attuned to others and what they say, this is general with Scorpio, Jupiter and Scorpio, psychologically attuned to another. In the third house, they can become the liar, and they can spin the tales in the story so well that someone else ends up feeling used and they don't even know how it happened. They can't quite put their finger on it, but it may not feel right in the pit of their stomach. And so this can lead sometimes to others bringing on intense confrontations to the soul who has Jupiter and Scorpio transiting the third house. Wait a minute. You are, you're just full of blah, blah. And I can't fight you word for word, but I know on an intuitive level, you're full of it and you're just trying to manipulate me. And so sooner or later, they'll run into others that just go, I ain't going to do this anymore. I don't want to have anything to do with you. Jupiter in Scorpio through the third. There can be sexual fickleness. You see how I put the word up there? In other words, they're just on the surface. They don't want to go deep. Intimacy can scare them. And so they can run from partner to partner to partner. And as long as, we don't go emotionally deep, as long as there's no real relationship going on, I'll show up. But oh gosh, I don't, it's too scary. I don't, this would be, again, that lack of trust, that lack of self-reliance from the Taurus polarity. And so they're just into playing sexual games and they don't ever want to go deep. One of the extremes that can happen with this Jupiter and Scorpio transit is the third house can hear voices in their head. It can be the extreme of the schizophrenic, and they don't know who's telling who, and they can get caught up in listening to these voices in their heads and doing what these voices say. And of course, while they can be excellent at manipulating conversation, they can also shut it down. They can be fearful of any deep communications. They don't want the exposure. They just want it to be on the surface. And so, adios, I'm out of here. I'm not going to talk about it. I'm going to leave if you keep on asking me about this. And so they can just have communication shut down that goes on. When Jupiter is transiting through the third house and they're learning to evolve a natural expression of this, there will be the opposite. There will be deep psychological communications. They'll be able to really hear what that other person is saying, not just the words, but what they're saying emotionally, what they're saying mentally, spiritually. And they will be able to learn to speak that way as well. They'll be able to intuit which words, which phrases, which type of languaging to use in order to be heard by someone else. So this can be the archetype of someone who is an excellent speaker. And they take that ability to have all of the words in the English dictionary, and they can just zone in on which words to say that are the most direct, that are the most honest, that just get to the point, that allows for, the best communication for all concerned. There can be a sensitivity to touch here on a sexual level. And this is coming from Gemini in the third house, having rulership of the hands. And so, this will have the touch in here. And so, this is a person who can not only be an excellent with massage, can be excellent touching on a non-sexual level. They can be quite gifted in the sexual touch as well. And they can do this in both giving to another person and in helping someone reciprocate to them so that they can receive how they would like to be touched as well. And there can be a communication around that, and they can communicate a lot sexually as well. They're not going to be the Tory and bump on the log just grunting away. They will have a lot of language in the sexual experience as well, which can add to the experience and situation. They can have healthy sexual role play because that Gemini third house can be so versatile. They can play this role or that role, and they can interchange the roles. However, they and partner are needing to experience something in their own healing of sexual wounding, or in their own growth and exploration and curiosity on a sexual level. There can be an ability to instinctively understand the depth of any situation and being able to respond however necessary. Again, third house in Gemini is variety. So you know how they can just, drop them into any group of people and they'll just carry on a conversation and start getting along with everybody. Well, transiting Jupiter in Scorpio can not only drop into that, they can drop right down to the essence of what's going on and know how to communicate, how to act, what needs to be, said and done to bring about evolution of any situation. There will also be an ability to utilize resources movement. In other words, comparing it to the second house where we might have some hoarding instincts or I need my stuff to feel secure. Here in this transiting house, the third house is going to realize it's the movement of the resources. It's, you exchange money for bread. You exchange resources for this fun activity. They can understand the ebb and flow of resources. And so they can be developing a natural intuition of when to share with someone and when they need to conserve, when they need to hold on to it, when it might be a time to save up resources to share in a larger way, for instance. But again, the point is they have an ability to just naturally go with that ebb and flow of resources coming and going. When we have Jupiter and Scorpio moving through the fourth house, the distortions are extreme emotional manipulations. We have a double water here going on with Scorpio and the fourth house, Cancer house. And so if there's lack of trust, if there's lack of self-reliance, they can be very emotionally needy. So then they have to manipulate the environment. They need to control their emotional environment. And what will happen here is it'll go to the extremes of always having to be parental energy or childlike energy. There's no adultness in the middle. They're the extremes of belittling everyone or not wanting to grow up. There can be all kinds of emotional manipulations. It's going to be relevant to what the rest of the chart is like and what their situation is like in regards to an intimate relationship or children or etc. There will be rage buildups when they're not processing emotions. Whereas the fourth house in Cancer is cardinal water, and they're animate, withdrawal, there's always an emotional processing. It slows down with Scorpio being fixed water, and the emotions can just build up until all of a sudden they just explode, and it's just got to come raging out of them. And that is an indicator that they're not working on their own emotional self-reliance, and they're not honoring the emotions and processing the emotions and communicating Jupiter the emotions and what is taking place in their environment and going on. Of course here, as I had mentioned earlier, there can, be familial death. There can be familial upsets and losses with Jupiter transiting through the fourth house. Many times this will be to throw the Jupiter and Scorpio soul in upon themselves to deepen their emotional self-reliance, to deepen their understanding of natural law in the universe and that natural death and rebirth process that we all go through in the universe. And there can be a very strong inability to trust themselves and to trust others. If in these situations we have souls that did not learn trust in their early environment. Fourth house, Cancer, is the early environment, and the world is safe or it's not safe. We have parents who help us feel safe or they don't. So if we don't grow up with learning to trust our familial environment, to trust our family, that gets extrapolated into adulthood. And so Jupiter and Scorpio can be very suspicious of others when it doesn't have an ability to trust itself or trust its environment. And they can even go to the point of being emotionally cruel and hurtful of others as a proactive action before they get hurt. On in the sexual arena, with the fourth house, it's blowing hot and cold, and that's going to be completely with how the emotions are going. Healthy emotions, we can have healthy sexual giving and receiving and interaction. A lack of trust, lack of security in the environment, emotional codependencies, emotional fears, that just gets them so vulnerable. Again, they can go into manipulating sexuality in the environment, turning the cold shoulder on someone, brushing the partner off when they want to just give them a simple hug or a touch. They can just go into that withdrawal part of the emotional cycle because it's either not safe or they want some of that Scorpio revenge. I'll get you before you get me. I'm going to hurt you before you hurt me. Again, when this transit through the fourth house is distorted, there's not any emotional stability, so the emotions can be all over the place. With resources, they can be extremely protective and controlling of the resources. Again, fourth house, I have to know my environment to be safe, and that environment can lean into stuff and resources and money. And so it can be a situation where they can go, a group of friends can go out, and this is always the person who, left their wallet in the car, and can you pay for this and I'll pay you back, and they never do. There can be all kinds of scenarios, but again, when there isn't that emotional safety, then there isn't going to be safety around resources or relating to others as well. As Jupiter in Scorpio transiting through the fourth house is learning to naturally express, it's the opposite of all of this, of course. It's going to be a deepening of emotional self-reliance and a deepening of self-trust. They're going to trust their intuition. They're going to trust their gut. They're going to trust their emotions. They're going to recognize, I've really got to deeply love myself first, or it doesn't matter with anybody else. So they can look at any of their childhood wounds. The majority of us are not raised in early environments of safety and trust. Then it becomes a lesson into adulthood, 10th house polarity, to heal ourselves, to learn how to parent ourselves. And that's what Jupiter in Scorpio is going to learn how to do transiting through the 4th house. These are my wounds. Well, this is what would help heal. And they're going to have that innate psychological ability to learn how to heal themselves in order to deepen their emotional self-love and self-reliance and trust in self. There will also be an accessing and balancing of their inner male and female. We learn in evolutionary astrology that Cancer, Capricorn, 4th, 10th will many times bring up issues around gender. And distorted in the 4th house, there won't be a trust of the other gender. Can't trust men, can't trust women. They're just out for your money. It's the opposite when they're learning to naturally express it. They're going to start to recognize that regardless of whichever gender they are, they have an inner male and an inner female. And they're going to ebb and flow between the two of them, however any situation feels best to do emotionally. And as well as the 3rd house, there is going to be a very strong sensitivity to touch. And there's going to be healing touch here, both sexual and non-sexual. We learn to have that healthy early environment in the 4th house. They need to feel safe in that human touch. They need to feel the hugs of both parents. They need to feel the hugs of the grandparents and the aunts and the uncles. And it's safe to have adults touch you. It's safe to have people touch you. And then that gets extrapolated into it's safe to be touched by others as an adult, sexually and non-sexually. So they will go about attempting to heal all of that and any wounds in those areas when Jupiter's transiting in Scorpio through the 4th house. They will also learn how to be very emotionally supportive of others without allowing codependency. They're not going to allow others to control them. They're not going to allow others to emotionally manipulate them. They're going to learn where it is necessary to have healthy emotional boundaries with another, and that is what they're going to sustain. They can be very giving. When they need their alone time, they recognize it. They are astute enough to share it with whoever they're relating to have that alone time, recenter, come out, relate to others, help others do the same thing. But they will not allow other people to manipulate them, control them, or become emotionally codependent upon them. As we're looking at Jupiter and Scorpio transiting through the 5th house, of course, as you may guess, some of the distortions will be the sexual affairs and manipulations. The trophy wives, and I put in trophy husbands too. We will use that Scorpio energy with sexuality and love affairs and substitute it for love. We'll use it to manipulate. We'll use it to manipulate resources. When we say trophy wife, the trophy means typically we have the female who marries into a male who has the resources and the money. He wants the sex, she wants the resources. Now, being fair to the genders, we can have males who do the same thing. This transit will take any situation to extremes in order to be noticed. Jupiter carries things to excess. 5th house is the Leo dramas, and Scorpio, those emotions get involved and it just goes all over the place. And coming off of the 4th house, if there isn't emotional self-reliance, if there is that insecurity that comes with Leo 5th house, then we got to be the biggest. We got to be the best. Reminding you of any presidents of any countries right now. Everything is, so good. It's just a miracle. It's just this. It's just that. Taking anything to an extreme to be the biggest and the best because there's nothing underneath supporting it. There can be excessive behaviors that have no self-reflection. In other words, because Jupiter in Scorpio is so psychologically astute, there can be a refusal to turn it inward to self. They'll just go on to the next extreme and the next behavior and the next risk and the next love affair and, bigger, better, and just projecting it out there that it's everybody else, not them. Of course, with this transit, we can gamble with our resources. We can live beyond our means. We can, manipulate with the resources. We can, see what we can get away with without having to be have any responsibility for our resources. You can have someone who has had a lifetime or two of being in upper classes or being in royalty, and they come in and they could just expect money to be there. And I don't have to watch a budget. I don't have to pay any attention to anything. And they can create some real extreme Jupiter and Scorpio upsets in regards to resources if there's no self-reflection in this regard, or there's no responsibility with resources. Of course, this house transit can have all kinds of karma with children, and we can even take it to the extremes here. We can have both the parent or the child with lies, deceit, overspending, disinheriting, controlling. I won't give you any money if you don't go to medical school like I did. The examples can be endless, but what happens is there there's games and manipulation between a parent and a child. And it could even be, 3rd house with siblings, even 5th house with siblings as well. Many of you, if you have any counseling of clients in astrology, you've heard stories of the 5th house where parents and children just do unbelievable things to each other. The parent can, because one child, wouldn't toe the line, they gave the money to all the other children and disinherited one of the children. Maybe there was a karmic reason why that needed to happen, and maybe it was just the cruelty of this Jupiter and Scorpio 5th house transit. Again, scenarios can be all over the place. This is the archetype that we're mainly looking at. If we look at the natural expressions of Jupiter and Scorpio transiting through the 5th house, here we get a strong creative force for good. All the creativity that comes through the 5th house, Jupiter can use its intuition to just really hone in Scorpio on where to create, how to create, what to create. Where is it the best for all? 11th house polarity. We can have a depth psychologist around the issues of love rather than the affairs, the manipulations, the risk-taking, the adultery, etc. This is someone who can just really hone in and go, here's what you need to do to really love yourself. And here's what you really need to do in your experiences of giving and receiving love with others. And so they can help, they can learn for themselves, and they can help others deeply give and receive love as each person needs. Many times with fifth house, there is giving according to what one wants to give versus giving what someone else actually needs. And here, Jupiter and Scorpio is going to be able to intuit what the other person needs, and they give from that perspective. We can have long-term commitments here based upon honesty, based upon deeply loving another person. I will commit to you through the thick and thin. I won't play games. We'll have deep, honest conversations of how we want to be loved. They will be empowering of other people, and they will be empowering of children. They will be role models with children. They will see the children as they are. They will give to the children as they actually need. They will be that psychological teacher and parent with the children and show them how to grow up in the world. We can have leadership roles here. We can have creative dynamos. Again, they know what to create, when to create. They just use that strong, deep intuition to know what is necessary to fulfill some need in society. And of course, when they're really working for the good of all concerned, we can have the Midas touch with resources here. They know how to create. They know how to share resources. They can, build up a bunch of resources, but they don't do that keeping up with the Joneses and, look at how big the diamond is on my ring. They're actually wanting to share their resources. They will help others in learning how to create resources. Jupiter in Scorpio transiting through the 6th house. Of course, with the distortions, we get into the extremes of victimization and victorization, power and powerlessness. And this will include all of the sexual distortions and games that can come along as well. This can be the sadomasochism in sexuality. This can be the sadomasochism in work, 6th house. This can be in almost any area of life. There is an inequality. There is manipulation of others. There is the allowing of ourselves to be manipulated because for some reason we don't feel we deserve to stand up for ourselves. There can be all kinds of manipulations through the element of criticism. Just tear someone down and then you can make them do what you want. There can be cruelty in general. This is where they can learn how to point out how fat you are or how stupid you are or wherever you feel your weakness is. They can just, tear somebody else down in order to make themselves feel better. And of course, then what we get is that psychological sadist. I'm going to get you before you get me. There can be all kinds of work and resource crises that never get resolved. I'm always overworked. I'm always under deadline. I'm always trying to get this done, trying to get that done. I never have enough money. I'm always running into something that happens in, with my pocketbook. I could never get ahead. And a lot of this is going to with sixth house essentially come down to self-worth issues and the relationship with source, 12th house polarity point. But distorted, all this just gets, extremed, examples of everything. We can have a hypochondriac here. Something's always wrong with me. I've been to the doctor 15 times and they still can't give me a label. I know something's wrong. I know something's wrong. And, again, it's an essence of victimization rather than self-responsibility. We can have extremes of guilt here. Guilt will come through 6th house, 10th house, and in the 6th house and the 12th house and the 12th house. And in the 6th, 12th house polarity, we have a lot of conditioned guilt due to the patriarchal conditions and the religious distortions that we have going on. But with this transit, we can have natural guilt going on as well. We can have either one, and both can be taken to extremes, and we can take that conditioned guilt to such an extreme that they just can't even function in life. They just can't even get anything done. Nobody wants to be around them because it's just one crisis over another. There can be an inability or a refusal to self-reflect here. Jupiter, intuition. Scorpio, those deep psychological abilities. The 6th house is where we naturally analyze. And there could be a fear of looking within, or an anger and refusal to look within. I don't want to change. I don't want to grow. I'm just going to be stuck in my crises because this is the story that I know. So then they're going to create more Scorpio explosions in hope that something will change. In the natural expressions here, there's a natural ability to know what needs improving in any situation. These are the natural healers of the zodiac, and they have strong healing talents, an ability to heal themselves, an ability to heal others. They can just intuit what the issue or health crises is, and here's what you need to do, and here's what will help best. They're just natural healers here and can, sometimes just do miracles. There can be work efficiencies through healthy efforts instead of the work crises that happen all the time. They just can turn that Scorpio eagle eye in and just hone in on what needs to be done and the best way to do it. These are multitaskers bar none. And they learn to do it through healthy efforts. In other words, that phrase, work smarter, not harder, that's a natural expression of Jupiter and Scorpio through the 12th house. They will have an ability to very deeply self-analyze and make whatever changes are necessary. This is what I need to do to self-improve, and they'll find the courage to do it. They can turn that eagle eye inward and evolve, grow. They can be very empowering of others. They're not into power over, they're not into the sadomasochisms. They want to empower others, and they can learn to do that with humility, which can be very powerful. I'm not doing it so you glorify me, distorted 5th house. I'm doing it because it's what's healthy for all concerned. They will also hold healthy boundaries with other people, and they'll hold healthy boundaries with life in general. Again, we're not going to do the extremes of victor-victim. They will also be able to have sexual healing abilities here as well. They will know how to naturally sexually serve another one, how to help, how to touch, how to heal. And in return receive that themselves. Transiting Jupiter in Scorpio through the 7th house, the distortions are going to be relating extremes, psychologically understanding another in order to manipulate the relationship. That psychology of listening, well, it's done because I want this relationship to work a certain way. There can be sexual games and obsessions. There can be an extreme focus upon another versus learning how to have a relationship with yourself. In other words, that obsessive compulsive complex can really come in here. I don't exist without a relationship. I'm, just going to figure out how to be whatever I need to be so that I can subtly manipulate you. They can use resources to control others. They can marry for money. Of course, there can be adultery here as well. They can be a sexual predator, and they may do it aggressively. They may do it passively. They can be a passive aggressive in general in order to be controlling of others and controlling of any situations. And when we're dealing with the 7th house, yes, we're dealing one-on-one with people, but we are also dealing with relationships in general. We can bring in friendships and family members here. And we just must be very, very careful of all the control games and manipulations and inequalities that's going to go on in any type of relationship. Because the natural expression is an ability to bring a psychological depth to any of those relationships, and to learn again to give to another as they actually need. So Jupiter and Scorpio through the 7th can learn to just be fair to the utmost level. They can have really good psychological abilities to assess what's needed in any situation to balance out extremes and make it fair for all concerned. These are the great mediators of the zodiac. They know how to help mediate any situation, any relationships between any people, one-on-one or in groups. Naturally expressed, this archetype transit is not interested in shallow relating. We're not interested in the Libra fluffiness. We want deep committing. We want deep relating. We want deep listening, deep psychological conversations. And they will want to take sexuality deep as well. They'll want it to be fair. They'll want it to be fair with giving and receiving. They will learn how, they will naturally almost be just great listeners. And from that, again, listening, then they know what needs to happen in which direction to bring about fairness and balance for everyone concerned. They will be sharing of resources here, and they will be sharing in a fair way. That Libra's 7th house phrase, when to give and when not to give, and when not giving is the greater giving, they're going to know. They're going to know how to share the resources. They're going to know when to share the resources. They're going to know what's best and fair for all concerned when it comes to any resource situations. And of course, these are people that are going to be trustworthy. You just feel good around them. You feel comfortable. I can trust you. You don't even have to be in an intimate relationship with them. They're just another soul on planet Earth that you feel that you can really trust in a situation or trust in asking for advice around something. Now, transiting Jupiter and Scorpio through the 8th house is, of course, going to be working through that whole Scorpio archetype. So when it's distorted, almost everything we've been talking about here, it's going to be the worst of the relating extremes, manipulations, obsessions, power struggles, entrapments, sexual abuses, betrayals of trust, abandonment, using someone only for the duration of getting their needs met. There can be relationship violence, there can be sexual violence, there can be resource abuses, there can be con games, there can be loss of resources, there can be resource hoarding, just like the second house polarity. In other words, a lot of the things that we've been talking about with the Scorpio archetype are just naturally going to be here when Jupiter in Scorpio transits its own house. The natural expression will be the opposite, and it will be the best of the best. They will be able to expand an ability to deeply penetrate any relating patterns and make any changes as necessary. They will refuse to control others. They will refuse allowing others to control them. There will be a deepening self-reliance to evolve merging with others. There will be a deepening of merging with others. These are, this transit is going to be looking for soulmates. They're going to be looking to empower others as much as possible. They want everyone empowered, no power over or under. They want a fairness of powering. They want to share resources. They recognize merging resources creates more resources. Of course, we will get into alchemical sexuality here, sacred sexuality, seeing the divine in themselves and in others, and seeing the divine in someone else through sexual bonding and merging. So again, everything we've been talking about in part 1 and part 2 with Jupiter in Scorpio is going to be an archetype when it transits through the 8th house. It will also be an archetype when Jupiter in Scorpio transits through the 9th house, because this is the natural Jupiter house. So when it gets distorted, there's going to be a lack of trust in a higher power. We can present ourselves as a savior and savior complexes. We can be the Pied Piper who leads somebody into all kinds of con games and give me your resources and I'll triple your money in 6 months. We can have an excellent liar here, what Jeffrey Green would call the silver-tongued devil. And we believe them, and then boom, they're back to an old pattern, and then they're come through again, and we believe them again, and sooner or later we just learn that it's words that don't mean anything. There can be an isolating of ourselves here versus confronting any area that needs growth and metamorphosis. There can be a dogmatic stubbornness around beliefs. There can be racism here. There can be racist beliefs. 9th house and Sag is where we come into context with those whose beliefs are different than us. People who live in different countries and cultures than us, and therefore those that are different skin colors than us. And with the extremes of Scorpio come the extremes of my race is better than your race. They can be the nomad here. They never want to settle down. They never want to connect. They never want to go to the Scorpio depth. When anything starts to get deep, they move on. The natural expressions, of course, is learning to trust the intuition around relationships. Learning to have a deep, deep relationship psychology. They will be working to expand their beliefs around relationships. What does it really mean to be in an intimate relationship with another? What does it mean to trust another? Can I really give myself to another? So there'll be direct, honest communications. They will see the divinity in another. They'll be inclusive of all beliefs and religions. They'll be inclusive of all races and nationalities. They will be a deep adherence to natural law, and they'll continue to seek it out and search for it and use those Scorpio psychological abilities to understand what's real and what's not, what's truth and what's not. There will be an ability to speak and teach without dogma. In other words, the concept of language falls into Jupiter Sag in the 9th house. And with Scorpio, they're going to have an intuitive ability, just like the 3rd house in many regards. They're going to have that intuitive ability to find the words, to find the language, to speak and be heard and understood. So they can be great teachers with this transit. They will also have that ability to call out the falsehood. They'll call the lies out and point them out for what they are and point out where they are false. And of course, being a fire house, there's going to be an honoring of freedom for all concerned here. Jupiter and Scorpio transiting through the 10th house. The distortions are going to be extremely controlling of their outer world and career. An obsessive need to be on top. To be the boss, to be the CEO, to claw their way up that corporate ladder. They can be controlling and ruthless with resources. The CEO who makes 300 times as much as the average worker. Cutthroat with co-workers to get to the top. There can be hoarding again. They can use their psychological knowledge to guilt others. Conditioned guilt will fall into the 10th house. 10th house Capricorn is society, and we must conform to society in order for society to function. And if we don't conform, we're made to feel guilty. So here they'll use that psychological knowledge and wisdom to make others feel guilty in order to control them. They can be very controlling and manipulating of the family environment in whatever circumstances it is. This can be, again, the male who wants the children to be extension of himself, and if they're not, I won't pay for your schooling, you'll get disinherited, I won't speak to you again. They can be emotionally rigid and shut down. And underneath, this is just going to be their own emotional fears and wounding and inability to be psychologically deep. They just, don't want to go there and refuse to go there. And another distortion, that ends justifies the means. In other words, their social power and position are everything. And everyone else, be it a spouse or a child or a parent or a coworker, everyone and everything else are just second place, because it's all about being in charge and at top in order to feel secure. Natural expressions, Jupiter and Scorpio transiting the 10th house, there will be an ability to recognize the outer world is a reflection of that inner world. Inner creates outer. So that will allow them to really work with being psychologically astute with their career. It's not just all out there, out there, out there. They're going, I've got to do it in here as much as I have to do it out there. And I have to have a career that fulfills me in regards to value and meaning more than just money. So they can learn what is the best career for them and what's the best way to go about it. And, what really serves me in maturing out into society and the world. And they can be helping others to do the same. They give that helping hand up. They help others with their career. They lift others up. They help others out there in that world to mature and have a position in the world. They will share resources again. They will help others in creating resources, teaching them how to build up their resource accumulation. They'll have an ability to discern between natural and conditioned guilt and act appropriately. If there is some natural guilt from previous abuses, this life or others, they will be naturally atoning for it. And they could do that in a very humble, deep way. And if it's conditioned guilt, they will throw it off. They'll recognize it and they will refuse to let guilt manipulate them. They will be self-reliant regardless of their social position. In other words, they will be so empowering of themselves. They don't need the social position to feel worthy. They may have it, but they recognize they stand separate from where they are in society. These can be the justice warriors. They will, fight for others and what is good for all in society. They will be trusting of the process of life. Sometimes 10th house Capricorn, just has to control its environment in order to feel safe. And when we realize we have to have inner security because outer world is always changing, this transit can trust that all will be okay regardless. And they will have peace with power. They won't be into power over. They won't be into all of the control games. They will know how to have a healthy use of power. And they can take it or leave it. Jupiter and Scorpio transiting through the 11th house. The distortions can be both past life and current life traumas that leave them paralyzed with fear. The fixed air of the 11th house, the fixed water of Scorpio, they just shut down through the traumas, can't process, can't look. And when that's the case, there is a strong need to control the environment in order to feel safe. So this means there's an inability to trust society and to relate to others. I'm just going to get hurt again. They're going to hurt me. Maybe I got to hurt them first. They could have easily been on both sides of the fence, but there's just this general paralyzation, and it's like the mind, fixed air, and the emotions, fixed water, they just run this little loop. And that's what PTSD is. That's what trauma does. We get stuck in the loop of the event or the crises, and we just relive it, replay it, relive it, replay it, and we can't ever move beyond it. In its extremes here, we can have an anarchist, can't relate to anybody. It's them against the entire world. We can have atheism here. There's been so much trauma. They can't believe in anything. They can't make sense of anything. There can be emotional shutdown or a violent raging. Can go either way with the Scorpio emotions here. Emotional shutdown, they're just going through the emotions, but it's almost like there's nobody home, there's nobody alive. And of course, you can imagine the raging that can go on here as that fixed energy builds up and then explodes. There can be a need to control any group involvement or secret society that they're involved with. I have to control the group in order to feel safe. I have to manipulate this group in order to feel safe. And of course, you can't trust society, so then they get involved in secret groups and secret societies. And just the secretiveness of Scorpio can then make them feel like they are safe or they're one up over society. And of course, similar to the anarchists, there can just be alienation here. They can't emotionally open up. They can't mentally open up. They can't function in society. They're afraid of society. They're shut down from society. They're just alienated. The deeper lesson of alienation is to individualize and learn how to be a group of one, but they can be paralyzed from learning that. Jupiter in Scorpio transiting 11th house as it learns to naturally express. It learns to trust in itself again. Taurus polarity, which then allows a trust with whatever their role in life is, which then allows them to trust society, which then allows them to help out in society. They can get involved in whatever social justice causes that they feel emotionally connected to. They can be content with their public role to whatever degree. In other words, the 11th house is always learning about society. And what does society need? How does society function? Where does society need to change? They can become involved to whatever degree in many, many different roles. And they can just intuit, this is where it's best for me. This is where I'm most helpful. This is how I want to do the work, and go for it. There can be deep psychological healing abilities here. Because this 11th house, the 11th house can carry trauma. When Jupiter and Scorpio really turns its intuitive and psychological abilities on the trauma, they turn into the healers. You know, when I was prepping all my notes for this, it reminded me of the deep memory processing work of Roger Wolker. And it's a past life regression therapy that is specifically trauma therapy, helping soul retrieval, helping those fractured parts of our soul to come back in and whole and heal ourselves again. This transit could, be excellent in doing that kind of work, as well as, trauma work in many different other types of areas. This transit is going to have an ability to stand in their own power without inflicting trauma, without hurting others. They'll protect themselves, they'll stand up for healthy boundaries, they'll stand up for justice, but they won't go out there and deliberately try and hurt someone else because they've been hurt. They can have an intuitive knowing about the leading edge of social progress and how to be involved with it, how to be a part of moving society forward. They can be telepathic and visionary. That fixed air of the 11th house is, can be very future orientated as well as the past. And you put that together with Jupiter and Scorpio, and they are self-reliant, self-trusting, evolving, healing. They can just, be quite visionary. They will also know how to balance themselves with their community. And they will balance their individuality with others, whether it's one-on-one or whether it's themselves and a group. And they will hold a healthy sense of self. They will not let themselves be consumed by the group. They will function in the group, they will be part of the group, and they will retain their sense of self, their empowerment of themselves, and work to empower the group. Jupiter and Scorpio transiting through the 12th house, distortions, addiction issues, obsessive compulsive complexes, death and suicide fantasies. This is the manipulator actor of the zodiac. This is the actor of the zodiac, 12th house, and Scorpio. And so they can just be anything they want to be to manipulate all over the place. Leroy, I think our company might be here. You want to turn on those outside garage lights, honey, and I'll just finish up. I got another 10, 15, 10 minutes to go at least, so you can, if you want to come up and down. But they can just, you know, again, if we take the distortions of Jupiter and Scorpio, this transit, they can be anybody and do almost anything. How mean, cruel, extreme, manipulating, controlling do they want to be? They can be extremely persecuted, the opposite of that. They can have powerlessness complexes. What difference does it make? I can never stand up for myself. They're going to get me anyway. They're going to hurt me anyway. They can be psychically ungrounded here. So caught up in the emotions, so caught up in, you know, the invisible world that they don't know how to put their feet on the ground. They can have extreme sensitivities. Must be careful with food and drink here. Jupiter can expand it. There can be savior complexes. They can be emotionally controlling through a sense of victimization. They can be lost in the world. Again, can't put their feet on the ground, can't seem to ground themselves, off in their Pollyanna existences. The natural expressions, they can be a laser-like ability to know truth from fantasy. There will be a deep self-psychology and honesty. There will be deep spiritual commitments. There'll be empowering of others on a spiritual path. They're empowering their own spiritual path. They won't put up with any fluff, and they point out all the falseness and any false gurus. So as they're doing it for themselves, they can be doing it for others as well. There can also be the desiring of another soulmate relating Scorpio, and with the 12th house, all the spirituality, Jupiter spirituality. So they just want to have very deep spiritual relating, whether it's intimate soulmates or it is anybody that they encounter in their world. They'll be working to release any relating karma. And that's the purpose again of soulmates. There will be an ability to put their creative talents in almost any direction. Just like they can manipulate in almost any way, they can create in almost any way. They will really allow that ultimate universal source to come through them and just help them really move and be in the universe however necessary. They can be very generous and giving of resources here as well. They will give you the shirt off their back. Sometimes there is the necessity to learn how to have healthy boundaries with the giving of the resources. That is necessary. Yeah, you don't want to go into that over giving until there's nothing of you left. You have to be quite attuned with source in order to have it show up again. It's possible, okay? But many times there can be some need to really learn how to have some healthy boundaries with what to give and when to give and how to give. Okay, so that is through all the 12 houses. I don't have Leroy on the board right now at this moment, but I had thought of a Native American quote and I didn't quite find it, but I found some others that I really liked. And I just thought that I would finish up Jupiter in Scorpio with some inspiring quotes for us, empowering quotes for us. Billy Mills was the Native American from Pine Ridge Reservation here in southwestern South Dakota, who the only Native American to win a gold medal in the Olympics. He did it with running. You have to look deeper, way below the anger, the hurt, the hate, the jealousy, the self-pity, way down deeper where the dreams lie, son. Find your dream. It's the pursuit of the dream that heals you. I thought that was a good one for finishing up Jupiter and Pisces through the 12th. And then I found a whole bunch more. Only when the last tree has died and the last river has been poisoned and the last fish has been caught will we realize we cannot eat money. Vine Deloria down here on the bottom is another Sioux. Sioux is an overall term for Lakota, Dakota, Nakota, and Indian. Those were the three dialects of the Sioux, although there was the 7 tribal fires of the Sioux. Lakota, Nakota, Dakota get broken down further yet. But Vine Deloria is, we're actually having a bust of his head, 4 Native American heads. We have a little park downtown where we have 4 busts of these Native Americans coming up, just like it's going to, you know, we have all the presidents on our main street in Rapid. We have the Native Americans bringing out their heroes as well. And he was a pretty well-known author. Religion is for people who are afraid of going to hell. Spirituality is for those who have already been there. And then up here, Tony Ten Fingers, he is Oglala Lakota. When you come to know nature is when you become one with our living world. One life, one world, one sky. And the Cherokees, I don't remember where they lived close to us. The Cheyennes were west of us. I think the Cherokees are east of us. I'm in the northern plains of South Dakota, for those of you who don't know it. Western South Dakota in the Black Hills, in the midst of our 9 Indian reservations. When you were born, you cried and the world rejoiced. Live your life so that when you die, the world cries and you rejoice. I love that one. You may not be able to see this wolf one, so I'll read it for you. This is a wolf prayer. Spirit of the wolf, you who wanders in the wild lands, you who stalks in silent shadows, you who runs in leaps between the moss-covered trees, lend me your primal strength and the wisdom of your glowing eyes. Teach me to relentlessly track my desires and toast and defend of and toast in I'm not reading that, and toast, it's not written right, and toast in defense of those I love. Show me the hidden face and the moonlit fields. Fierce spirit, walk with me in my solitude. Howl with me in my joy. Guard me as I move through the world. And finally, this is a long one, but this is Black Elk. And of course, he is one of our most famous Indian chiefs in the Sioux world. And for those of you who are familiar, in the Black Hills of South Dakota, last year, our highest mountain peak, which was called Harney Peak, after a general who was pretty cruel to the Indians, our peak was renamed Black Elk Peak. And Black Elk Peak is the highest peak west of or east of the Rockies. Between the Atlantic Ocean and the Rockies, Black Elk Peak is the highest peak. And Black Elk received a vision at the top of this peak when he was pretty young. And if you really would like a good book on him, A Black Elk Speaks, and I'm not going to remember the author right now, but it's a very popular book, Black Elk Speaks, very wise book. The first piece, which is the most important, is that which comes within the souls of people when they realize their relationship, their oneness with the universe and all its powers, and when they realize that at the center of the universe dwells Wankan Tonka, the Great Spirit, and that this center is really everywhere. It is within each of us. This is the real peace, and the others are but reflections of this. The second piece is that which is made between two individuals. The third is that which is made between two nations. But above all, you should understand that there can never be peace between nations until there is known that true peace, which, as I have often said, is within the souls of men. So I have a love of Native American quotes, so thank you for allowing me to share these with you. Here are our webinars. We are taking a little bit of a break until the end of November, which, as you can see on your screen, we'll have the free Mercury retrograde that we do approximately 3 times a year in Sagittarius. And then December will be quite busy. Saturn is going to go into Capricorn, and that's going to be quite a strong transit as it's catching up to Pluto. And as Jupiter then goes through Sag and catches up and goes through Capricorn in 2020. We'll do it in a 2-part series. We'll have a part 1, which is going to be the archetypes and the cycles, and then we'll have a part 3, which is through all of the 12 houses. So those are the public webinars through the end of the year, and of course finishing up on January 3rd with our 2018 forecast. I don't know if Leroy has made it back to the end of, or has made it to the board or not. So I don't know if I can, I don't know how to open the board up for questions. So are you there, Leroy, by any chance? I don't think I have. So,
I'm here.
Oh.
I'm here. Yeah, I can hear you now.
Oh, thank you. Sure. I'm done. I was just checking in to see if there were any questions from the board or anything.
Yeah, there was just one question from Ashlyn about the name of that soul retrieval author that you referred to earlier in the webinar.
Oh, yeah, that's Roger Woolger. Roger, R-O-G-E-R, and Woolger is W-O-O-L-G-E-R. His methodology is deep memory processing, DMP. Roger has been in spirit world since 2011, but his trainer in the US is Patricia Walsh. Some of you may know Patricia from her book, Understanding Karmic Complexes. She does the trainings for Roger's work now. Roger's most famous book is Other Lives, Other Selves. Again, Other Lives, Other Selves. And it's an excellent, excellent book to understand all the different complexes that are within a soul, and also how Roger came about this work that he did. He started out as a Jungian analyst that therapists that went the direction of reincarnation, which they do not all do. So it's a beautiful method. I've been involved with this method for a long time. I've helped Pat do trainings with it across the US. And so highly recommend that work if you have any interested in it at all. And if you do, you can go see Roger's history at rogerwoolger.com. And Patricia's website is healthepast.com. 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 So Roger Wolger, Deep Memory Processing.
Kim,
And the other, yes?
did you not choose to mention that you are certified to do that work here in the United States as well?
Oh, yeah. I help Patricia do the trainings with the work. Yes, I'm certified to do the work. And
Jeez.
and as a matter of fact, I had someone come from Minneapolis last month and actually stayed with us at the house for 3 days, and we did 3 days worth of in-depth processing of the deep memory processing. So any of you have any interest in doing the work with me, I'm available. You have to come see me, unless you want to pay for me to come see you, but
Yeah,
yes.
and particularly this group because of the natural connection with EA.
Yes, exactly. Patricia is certified as an evolutionary astrologer. I'm certified as a deep memory practitioner. Teach and do the work. And stay tuned. Pat and I are kind of planning to do some astrology workshop together next year in 2019. Don't have any dates or places yet, just in early planning stages. But
did you mean 19 or 18?
2018.
Okay, yeah.
2018. If you get our newsletter, if you listen to our podcast, you will definitely hear about it. All right. Thank you all very much. Any other questions? Okay, Leroy has a tendency to silence himself, so I'm going to...
No questions. Oh. We're good to go.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much, everyone, and enjoy your fall. Enjoy your evolutionary journey of Jupiter through Scorpio. Until next time.